Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Despite Max Verstappen's victory in Montreal, Red Bull's dominance they had at the start of the season has definitely waned over the last few rounds, and apparently Red Bull are not so convinced that some of these other cars behind them on the grid are actually legal. Questions being raised over flexible wings yet again here in the world of Formula 1. Red Bull dominated, it seems, in this category over the last few years. Now other teams have caught up, and now Red Bull seems to want it banned. Very much interested in your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I would greatly appreciate it. First of all, back to our favourite source of F1 news, Business F1 magazine. Let's just say these guys, when they say something, it's not exactly 100% confirmed, but I will mention that today they are reporting that the Adrian Newey to Ferrari deal is done, and apparently has been done for some time, although I kind of struggle to believe that Business F1 magazine knows about this, and they apparently know lots of details, but nobody else seems to know anything. So anyway, the article says Eddie Jordan, the kind of unofficial, whatever you want to say, manager of Adrian Newey, has negotiated a deal to join Scuderia Ferrari effective 2025 to 2027. Apparently this deal was signed before Miami, which, as you guys will know, is rather a long time ago now. It's apparently $105 million over 3 years, and the deal is being kept secret, although it will inevitably leak out more and more as more and more people become aware. So then they say that Jordan's got a $5 million commission for doing the deal. It's a 50% uplift on his previous salary, and basically it's job done. But so I guess we'll see. It would make sense if what they are saying is true. The numbers kind of seem to align with what you might imagine could be the case, especially on the Eddie Jordan angle. And of course, joining Ferrari as Newey for 25, 26, 27 does make probably the most sense of all teams that he could potentially join. And he has made it quite clear, Newey, that yeah, he probably will return at some point, despite some concerns, and probably understandably, on the 2026 set of regulations. But I still have a kind of difficult time believing that these guys at Business F1 magazine know all of these details, and yet nobody else seems to know and be reporting anything. So, you know, I'll wait for some more confirmation, shall we say, around the world of F1 journalism before we really say this is locked in. Couple of things on the driver market, because there's been big discussion on what's going to happen with, let's say, Esteban Ocon. At the end of May, there was talk Behrman-Ocon as a duo is plausible over at Haas. That was, of course, before lots of the drama that unfolded post-Monaco. Then there's reports that, yes, Behrman and Ocon is the most likely duo at Haas for next season, although Guan Yu Zhou is a possibility. Gotta say, Logan Sargent gets a lot of stick, and I think for good reason, to be perfectly honest. But Zhou, despite not crashing as often, is still pretty underwhelming, right? And he obviously didn't have a great weekend as well. His car isn't great, but Zhou, if he gets a 4th year in Formula 1, I'll feel like that's a bit of a disservice to better drivers that are out there. But he does have big backing, so Haas may... Well, they're going to get rid of Magnussen, we think. They're going to bring Behrman in for effectively Nico Hülkenberg, who's going to Audi. Zhou could be an option. Apparently, they're offering like $30 to $35 million, his team. And that's pretty difficult to turn down. If it's not that, it's probably going to be Ocon. And I think that Ocon-Behrman partnership, I mean, look, anyone that Ocon's with, it's going to be fiery. I think that's really interesting if that turns out to be true. There's still some talk at VCARB as to whether Ricciardo will actually stay. The feeling is that they're going to keep him because he's so good for marketing, and I don't know, Horner likes him, and Horner obviously is calling all the shots over there now after the power struggle has resolved itself, and Marco clearly doesn't have the say that he previously did. But there is still talk from Horner that, like, Ricciardo's going to have to work hard to retain that seat if it's what he wants to do. And of course, if they keep Ricciardo, then they can't have Lawson around anymore, and then Lawson will obviously be able to go elsewhere. Where would he go, though? I mean, is there really a good option out there on the grid right now? It's kind of tough. I would feel like if Lawson doesn't get the RB seat next year alongside Tsunoda, I think it would be a disservice to his talent, but intrigued to your thoughts in the comments. Other reports are emerging as well that the Antonelli Mercedes deal is done, and that Antonelli will be 100% guaranteed replacing Lewis Hamilton in next year's W16, although some people are saying it's basically done, 95%, but apparently it's not yet been signed, so they could still change their mind with Ocon or Sainz out there. But let's be real, this Antonelli thing is happening, whether you think it's a good or a bad idea. I've said before, I think it's going to work out in the long term, but time will only tell on that one. Mercedes do say, though, that, you know, they've not done anything yet, they've not signed any contracts yet, but even Toto Wolff was asked the question, given the fact that they literally have said, Toto and Mercedes, Sainz we're not interested because we are going to bide our time and you need to sign something quickly, but also we're not interested because we've made our plan already, basically, especially because Alonso re-signed with Aston Martin. It was then apparently quite easy for Mercedes to lock down the Kimi Antonelli option, which it now seems is exactly what they are going to do. Speaking of Carlos Sainz though, Michael Schmidt from AMUS, and we're going to see what he has to say in a second here on the Flexi-wing stuff, which is back in the news, but Williams have supposedly offered Sainz a 4-year deal, which is pretty mega, and this is why Sainz apparently is getting offered similar money to drive for Williams than he would be to drive for Audi, because Audi have given, according to Helmut Marko, a lucrative offer for Sainz to join. There's obviously the relationship with his father, Sainz Sr. That makes sense. The problem is the Sauber is crap, and Audi in 2026 are not necessarily going to come around and make a good car because, you know, how good is Audi's engine project going to be? We don't really know. There are some rumours that Audi are kind of 1 foot in, 1 foot out Formula 1 for 26. There's still some, you know, trepidation, shall we say, in terms of whether they're actually going to do a good job or not. And of course, they're buying Sauber, a team that currently is producing the worst car on the grid. So if I'm Sainz, I'm not going to Audi, respectfully. You know, and if they turn out to be good in 2026, you can probably go there in 2027, for example, with this proposal. So it's a 4-year deal, but apparently a 2-year option. So Sainz would drive for Williams, 25-26. In 26, obviously, you would then see, is the Mercedes engine a rocket ship in the Williams? If it is, fantastic. Maybe there'd even be a chance to go to the main Mercedes team, depending what happens in the course of that season. Obviously, Aston as well are going to Honda, so it's McLaren, the other Mercedes power team at the time. And if it's not that good, and if Audi are looking okay, could you still jump ship if you're Sainz and go to Audi? Probably yes, they'd probably still have you, given what we currently understand. So that's the Sainz-Williams situation. To me, it makes sense. I expect that to be announced probably by the Spanish Grand Prix, to be perfectly honest. But let's talk a little bit more about some of the events of Montreal. Zak Brown decided that Red Bull, sure, well done, you won another race, but he is not going to stop the, stir in the pot, shall we say. Zak Brown actually bounces back and says Red Bull has still a pretty toxic environment. Red Bull is a pretty toxic environment right now. There is more to come. And this is what he's been saying for some time, and has still been the general feeling, let's say, in the paddock, that what we saw at Red Bull with the Newey departure and the other things that have happened there behind the scenes over the last couple of months, his feeling is there is more to come. He's mentioned it that there's going to be more departures. Newey's departure is an important one because I think a lot of people at Red Bull started working with him. I already mentioned that there were resumes circulating, so, Zak Brown saying, yep, remember when I stirred the pot a couple of weeks back, I'm now going to do it again, and even more severely in some ways. That happens all the time, but you see a higher level of discomfort. I also think that in the future it'll be more difficult with sponsors because they are going to have to examine carefully what they are associated with. That is a tricky situation, he says. And Zak Brown, we know he loves a good sponsor. This guy is out of control when it comes to sponsor arrangements, and obviously, by saying this, he's saying, look, if you're supporting Red Bull, what are you actually giving your money to and supporting? So, it's all a game of politics, isn't it, here in Formula 1? You have the whole Verstappen drama. Is he staying or leaving? Max has a contract. Only his father is pretty outspoken. So, still kind of stirring the pot on the idea that Max staying at Red Bull is not absolutely a guarantee forever. They still are the best car, but it's not quite as dominant as it previously was. Max is still going to win this year's Drivers' Championship, I'm firmly convinced, and he's probably going to find a way to win this year's Constructors on his own, but well, we'll see about that one. We'll probably talk about that slightly more tomorrow. But I think watching the Montreal Grand Prix, especially the performance, shall we say, of George Russell, who put it on pole very impressively, but during the race, couple of mistakes, cooked the Inters a little bit too hard in the early part of his stint. Russell is a pretty known quantity, incredible qualifying pace, but in the race, he is prone to a mistake. He is prone to having weaker race pace and tyre management than, of course, his teammate Lewis Hamilton, and Max Verstappen was able to capitalise that, right? It's like, was the Mercedes or the Red Bull the faster car on the Sunday? Pretty tough to say. Probably I'd lean the Red Bull's way, but obviously when you've only got one driver and Perez is out of the fight, it's tough to call. But this is the reason why Toto wants Max so much, because if he could put Max in the Mercedes, I think Toto would think, you know, we might have won that race on the Sunday, whereas Russell was eventually third. But if Mercedes' car gets a bit better, they are still in position to do some serious damage. Russell believes that Mercedes' progress is sustainable. Let's hope we can continue being in the fight with Max. It's funny that he doesn't say being in the fight with the Red Bulls, just says, of course, with Max. And even James Allison mentions that in Barcelona, they're expecting to be competitive, but probably not as good as the Red Bull there. The issue is with the Mercedes that it did very well, obviously, in Montreal. But if you look at the Montreal circuit, it's effectively the same type of corner every corner. Every corner is a slow to medium speed chicane, pretty much. There's the hairpin, there's a couple of others, but pretty much every corner profile is either left and then right or right and then left, and that's pretty much what the Montreal circuit is. And the Mercedes has seemed to struggle getting the balance. You know, they can set the car up well for high-speed corners, but they're going to sacrifice in the low speed. They can set the car up well for low speed, but they're going to sacrifice big in the high speed. When you've got all the corner profiles are kind of similar, it's given Mercedes the belief that actually they're really good there. But Allison is kind of concerned that hotter asphalt, wider range of cornering speeds, you know, they're not sure the W15 is going to be as good. He does say, though, I also know what we have coming, which heavily implies big upgrades on the way and upgrades for Spain they are bringing. They've got a couple of new things again for the Spanish Grand Prix. So, you know, there's something to be said about Mercedes' revitalization this season. Ferrari, they are also trying to resolve their problems, because I talked about this going into the weekends. Cold conditions, especially wet conditions with inters. Ferrari's tyre wear, fantastic this season, unbelievably, given where they've been for the last couple of years. But as a kind of byproduct of that, their tyre warm-up isn't great. They're not able to quite put in the quali laps this year than they were last year, but Ferrari say, look, we are going to be able to eliminate this problem. The solution is in the works, but it's probably going to be arriving too late for an actual championship challenge this season. That is what I would well estimate. But at the same time, during the Montreal Grand Prix, and certainly since Imola, there's been big talk again about the flexible wings. You guys might remember this topic of discussion last season. The Flexi-wings were a big talk, and to be honest, they've been a big talk forever in Formula 1. 2021, it was a big discussion. We'll see an example of that in a second. And this is just the natural way that Formula 1 goes. So let's just have a look at a front wing, for example. This is the Mercedes one from the start of the season. These cars are made out of carbon fiber. It's very light, these materials, actually. The car weighs significantly less than a ton, which is still heavy, right? We wish the cars were lighter, but the parts are actually really light compared to what you might expect them to be like, because they're made of carbon. So when the car moves, the pieces of the car, the aerodynamics, are going to flex under load to some degree. Now, there are limits imposed on how much they are allowed to flex, but they're never going to be entirely static, obviously. So if you're an engineer, what you want to try and do is create a world where at lower speeds, the wing finds itself in a position where it generates maximum downforce, but as the speed picks up and there's more load on the wing, it actually ideally can start to depress somewhat towards the ground and move into a position where it's actually generating less downforce than it otherwise might have done. That, of course, is advantageous in a straight line. If I'm going through a corner at medium speed, I want maximum downforce for the front wing. If I go on the straight, ideally, I want my wing to flex a little bit so that it generates less drag while I'm on the straight. So this is a challenge that, of course, the teams try and solve, and rumour has it, Red Bull have been killing it at this basically for the last couple of years. But this season, the other teams have caught up. And this comes at an interesting time, because there's been discussion recently that Ferrari, for example, or even McLaren, they've been able to replicate or even in some sense surpass the Red Bull DRS effect from the last couple of seasons. Looking at some of Red Bull's solutions from 22-23 and actually creating better versions here in 2024, Red Bull aren't absolutely leading the pack in every single way anymore. There are some teams that have done better jobs in certain areas. And now apparently that extends to the front wing. So since Imola, Michael Schmidt, again, this is very good sources from ABUS, say there have been heated discussions about the front wing fueled by Red Bull, who seemingly are frustrated that the other teams are catching up to them and trying to figure out, can we do anything in the rulebook to get this stuff banned? They claim that the front wing bends a lot, especially McLaren's. It's also seen at Ferrari and now Mercedes too. Bit strange is coming from Red Bull, because they were the actual champions about doing this. Now they are getting nervous. Christian Horner told me that the FIA are playing a bit blind on this, and they claim that everything's fine, but to be honest, all the front wings passed the technical inspection, so it's all fine and legal. So Horner and Red Bull are seemingly saying, look, these front wings flex more than they should. FIA, what are you going to do about it? The FIA say, well, maybe you're right, but they do kind of pass the current tests, right? Because this is the thing, the way the tests work. They're often like static load tests. So the car is standing still, you put some load on it, and you see whether it moves more than it should do at that amount of loads. The thing is, these engineers in Formula 1, they're rather clever, aren't they? So there are ways where these engineers are able to make the static load test pass the test, but if that same load was being delivered by the aerodynamics at 180 miles an hour, the wing actually flexes a bit more. I don't know how you pull that off. You know, it's on the engineers to tell you the answer to that, and they're not going to tell you because obviously they want to keep this stuff secret, and Red Bull apparently have done a good job of that over the last couple of years, but now McLaren, especially Ferrari and even Mercedes, have come up with similar, if not even better solutions to what Red Bull have, and therefore Red Bull are saying, they're cheated, you know, we don't like this flexi-wing stuff, it's got to go. What they say is that the front wings bend in a specific way, differently at every team, for some outwards, for some the flaps even turn backwards. The aim, of course, to lose downforce at high speed. We know that Mercedes, of course, have brought this new front wing version over the last couple of rounds. This is George Russell with it. Of course, he had it in Monaco as well. Hamilton got it for the first time this past weekend in Montreal. Just to have a quick look at this, because, I mean, this has been around forever, really. Here we are back in 2021 with the Mercedes, and you can see as we go down the straight here, this top flap is along this line. So if we get to the end of the straight, this is where the flap is on the straight. However, at lower speeds through the corners, let's say right about here, when this is, of course, Portimao in Portugal, as Hamilton, or maybe Bottas, I'm not exactly sure, gets to the corner, look where this front wing angle is now. So that is the difference. The Red Bull was very similar in the season. We can see that this line is where that top flap was there, and then if we go through the corner, you'll find it, you know, basically went up to here. So it wasn't maybe as much of a difference as the Mercedes, but nonetheless, the hashtag flexi-wing has been a thing for years. 21, 23, and now here we are in 24, and it's happening again. Whether Red Bull get anywhere with this, I'm not convinced personally, just because the FIA have effectively said that whatever happens now, they don't really care. Like, they're focused on 2026, and they've got a lot to figure out, the FIA, for 2026. Those regulations, of course, are a big stir over the last few days. There are major rumours that many of the teams are deeply unhappy with the state of those regulations, especially the active aerodynamics, and therefore the FIA have a big job on their hands to resolve those conflicts over the next couple of months, effectively. I don't really think they have the time to be properly policing some of these marginal flexi-wing stuff. And even the FIA themselves said, I think it was maybe Tombassis that said, Nicholas Tombassis, that was like, well, you know, yes, teams are exploiting loopholes that are creating more dirtier than we would like, but we're not really going to do anything about it until 2026 because they kind of have too much on their plate right now, the FIA. And, well, maybe they shouldn't have too much on their plate. Maybe they should just be better and more functional. That would be nice, but they're not. So it is what it is. Just one final thing to close out with. Sorry to all the Ferrari fans out there, but I kind of had to do it. The first time since Baku 2022 that no Ferrari-powered car scored a point. Because, well, the Ferraris didn't. Obviously, the Sauber is terrible. And then the Haas didn't do well this weekend either. So a double DNF for Ferrari left them with no points for the first time since Azerbaijan 2022. And just one final very interesting stat to close out the video, but very much interested your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.